Go. Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Good evening, dear academic partners, ENSCI team and students. Monsieur le Professeur, Monsieur MANZINI, welcome back to ENSCI. I'd like to warmly thank all the ESAM community of interest, and especially Clotilde Ferrand, Stéphanie Guidoni, j'ai vu que Michel Terré était là, Gabriela Bandura, Serge Gadebois, Charlotte Lucchini, The Paris, La Villette School of Architecture, Manoula Antonioli, Florian Bulot-Fézard, and all the ENSCI team engaged in this great program, Elena Tossi Brandi, Véronique Escher, Yasmina de Takatsi, Olivier Hirt et Eric Anspar. And special thanks to Licia Botoura. Monsieur Ezio MANZINI, vous êtes ici chez vous. We missed you since your last visit in 2015. While preparing this little speech, I read again the way we pitch our school model on our website. ENSCI is a platform of learning for what is seen to be an emerging profile of creative professional. It is hoped that broadening vision, experience and skills, and developing the capacity to deal with complexity, extend the role of design and stimulate creative thinking within industry, infrastructure, and institutions. Création industrielle, industrial creation, has become an open-ended term, which has evolved with changes in the design profession over the past 40 years. Nowadays, the act of design, no verb exists in the French language, by the way, could be expressed by creative project intelligence. All terms have evolved enormously since the founding of the school. For about 4 decades now, the ENSCI, learning by doing practices, its uncomfortable way of addressing the contemporary world, has proved its efficiency to bring powerful answers to complex society and economic problems, from forms follow functions to services design. Faire projet, be project-oriented, strongly resonate with the 21st century challenges. 15 years ago, what was a small part of, I may say, bad few to compare to happy few, if I may say, became an obvious and critical worldwide issue. I remembered 8 years ago, during an audit in the European Commission in Brussels, meeting with a member of a European Commission, Parliament. I'm sorry, but I really can't say the country where he was from to get politically correct. Furiously, this member of European Parliament was furiously arguing against what he called at that time the false theory of climate change. This climate change denier has changed sides today. The avant-gardist model of ENSCI gave birth to new design fields. Connect people with places we live in, social dimension in the ecological one, social innovation design, institutional changes, all those topics are shared here. Through students' projects, partnership projects, either industrial or institutional. And through academic projects within our design research center, such as our research projects, such as share of innovation, public innovation, or S'entendre, or soon the share impact, dedicated to circular economy and eco-design. It's not only a question of change. It's a question of metamorphosis. How to change for the better our preferred world, including the living things and our planet. Monsieur le Professeur MANZINI, it's a great honor for me, for us, to welcome you at ENSCI for this conference and for this week. And I can't help but envy my students, for I would love to be part of this workshop. Design, craft, sense-making. I believe that design is the discipline which concedes the making of sense. we, as a school, involved in an always learning process, are all engaged on participating to the transformation of our practices, behaviors, and people relationships for what I could call the ecology of living together. I wish you an amazing workshop, and I'm thrilled to invite you to the 40 years anniversary of ENSCI next year. So I will propose to Manuela to continue the short introduction.
Attendez.
Pour vous dire que la conférence de ce soir ont été conçues comme une étape introductive à un cycle de séminaires sur le design que nous avons conçu avec le champ ACCP de la commune ESAM. ACCP, c'est art, création, conception et patrimoine. Et donc, les thématiques de ce séminaire ont été établies en partenariat avec des doctorants de l'École nationale supérieure d'architecture de la Villette et des étudiants de l'ENSCI. Et on a décidé d'intituler ce cycle « Design et écologie relationnelle » pour montrer effectivement que le design ne s'occupe bien sûr pas simplement de produire des objets, mais aussi et surtout de dessiner de nouveaux modes de relation. Donc, il y a des thématiques qui ont été retenues en fonction des choix, effectivement, des étudiants et des doctorants, qui sont les pédagogies alternatives en conception et notamment en design, les liens entre le design et les pratiques militantes féministes et queer, les questions du design décolonial ou postcolonial. Là, il y aura un grand débat autour de ces questions. Et ensuite, les questions de l'hospitalité et l'hostilité graphique et du design en milieu rural. Donc, toutes ces questions seront traitées entre le mois de décembre et le mois de mai, où vous aurez certainement le programme à votre disposition, une fois par mois environ, sur l'année universitaire, dans différents établissements de la commune ESAM. Et donc, maintenant, j'ai l'honneur de présenter M. Ezio MANZINI, qui, après avoir écrit La matière de l'invention et Artefacts vers une nouvelle écologie de l'environnement artificiel, qui ont été des textes très importants pour la théorie du design, s'est tourné vers le design pour le développement durable et pour l'innovation sociale. Il est actuellement professeur honoraire au Politecnico de Milan et il a fondé en 2000 avec François Jégou, designer ancien de l'ENSCI, donc ces liens avec l'ENSCI datent d'il y a longtemps, le réseau international DESIS, dont l'ENSCI est membre depuis 2012. En 2015, il a publié au MIT Press Design When Everybody Designs, sous les formes de conception participative pour l'innovation sociale, où il interroge le rôle possible du design et du designer dans les formes participatives. Et ensuite, il a collaboré activement avec plusieurs villes comme Barcelone, Shanghai et d'autres sur l'innovation sociale pour l'enrichissement des relations entre les habitants dans la vie et la ville de proximité. Après Politics of the Everyday en 2019, il vient de publier cette année en italien Abitare la prossimità. Et donc, pendant toutes ces années, il y a eu un lien extrêmement étroit, même si découpé dans le temps, avec l'ENSCI. Et donc, nous sommes tous honorés et ravis de l'accueillir ce soir pour cette conférence inaugurale. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Good. So, thanks for the introduction. the both introduction. And yes, I feel at home here. I was discussing with some friends, and Licia Bottura in particular, that I've been related to Les Ateliers before the Les Ateliers have been founded, because in some way I met and discussed with Monsieur Monza de Saint-Étienne. Ça signifie more than 40 years ago. And afterward, for a period, I gave some courses here regularly, so I also speak in French at that moment, but now I don't dare to speak in French, but maybe at the end of this week it will be a little bit better, but you can speak French, I understand. And so I spent a lot of time with Licia and Lise and the director of the time, and it was very interesting. And by the way, also, as has been mentioned, I found one of my best collaborators during this long period, that is François Jégou. I met him as a student of the school. And afterward, the period I've been in the steering committee that has been at a certain point existed. So I had several moments in this very long period to exchange something with the school. In the last period, not so much, because I am not ubiquitous, so in some way my interest, the case of life pushed me more toward the east, and therefore I didn't have so much time to do something else. But now I'm really, in some way, getting out from the being closed and being at home for quasi 2 years. This is the second time that I'm outside from Italy in more than quasi 2 years. So I'm very happy that this first time is in this place that is at the same time so familiar with me, but also I have not met you since many years. So thanks for having thought to me. And now let's go to the topic. I don't know if I well interpret what has been the requirement to me, but I have understood that I had to share my view in this moment on the issue of social innovation and design for social innovation. And I am very happy to do it because for some reason they will appear very quickly. Let's say summarize that we can now, after this, when we say social innovation, we talk about a social phenomenon that happened more or less in the last 15, 20 years, moving from some place in the globe and spreading in other places in the world. But afterward, we know the social innovation, not something only the one that we are talking about. In the life of the humanity, we have always had social innovation. So after 15 years, we can say that everything that we said about social innovation is related to a certain wave of social innovation. Maybe you know, maybe not, but the innovation, also the technological innovation, is very well known. That is not going linearly, but there are waves of social innovation for some reason. And if we have this wave of innovation for technology, we have also wave of innovation for social innovation. So after a while, we have to take a little bit of distance of what is happening, what happened, recognize the context with the values and the limits of the context in which it appeared, and maybe recognize that, I don't know what happened here, there is something, somebody has to come here to see what is happening, please, because I think that it do not work if, and so I will try to give you what we, and me in particular, have learned in these 15 years, but at the same time to say that probably we are now at the beginning of a second wave of social innovation. So we have to consider what happened, to see what is important to have continuity in time, but at the same time start to look around to see where the new wave of social innovation is appearing. And I will tell you, or try to say why for me, out of doubt, there will be new waves of social innovation, or probably they are already happening, but we are not still with the right spectacles to recognize what it is. But let's go in order. So I already say something big happened that at the beginning of this century, starting mainly from urban white middle class that have the perception to become poorer and had the possibility and the tool to start to imagine something else. This something else was behave in a way that was not obvious for what will be at the moment the mainstream way of thinking and doing, and started to make something. And we call it social innovation. The right way to talk about it should be radical, transformative, social innovation towards sustainability. Because in the same period we have had also other social innovation that are not so nice and are not going in the right direction. So in some way Al-Qaeda is a social innovation too, or some way of being a populist is a social innovation too. So we select the one that we like because we feel that they are promising to move towards sustainability. So this is what we are talking about. So let's try to characterize what we saw. And at the beginning I remember very well, not only me, but everybody that was working in the same direction, we, with some surprise, discovered there was people that was in some way capable to organize new way of living. People that was capable to organize new kind of services that were more collaborative. People that was capable to reorganize the network of food and generate new relationship between citizen and countryside, and redefine what is eating as opposed to what was the most traditional way of thinking about eating. But also through the maker movement and the Fab Lab movement, we have also the possibility to think production in a different way. So there was not only the vertical big factory, but you could also have something that was more spread. So I could continue. Practically, there is no area of the daily life that has not been invested by a group of people doing something that at the beginning was only different from what the normal sociologist and the normal people looking to the behavior of people was talking about. And at the beginning, this is something that I remember very well, we consider them by one specific point of view, to be creative communities. So to be community that were creative because they was able, as the term creativity means, to reorganize what they had, so to reorganize the technology, to reorganize the space in which they could have an action, to create, as one of the definitions of creativity is to reorganize the element of the system to create a new meaning. So they create a new meaning. And we like it a lot, this creative dimension. And so we wrote book, or we wrote papers about creative communities, and we were very interested to this initial stage of the social innovation. I say initial stage because time goes on and we discover that the creative community are very important, but afterward the idea that they generate are a service idea, to use our idea of how to solve some problem. In our language is the service idea. And this service idea afterward have a kind of evolution. Some of them died because maybe the idea was not strong enough. Some of them, you see some people close themselves in little group, very ideological, and so in some way nice by the point of view of human intention, but not so important by the point of view of change because they are closed in their little niche. Some of them turned in something else. If you want just to say some names that everybody knows, but Uber or Airbnb, that now are big international monster, at the beginning, not of the company, but the beginning of the idea, it was something we considered as interesting social innovation in the idea on which they worked. So some of them started alternative and have been turned toward being some, in my view, also the most dangerous way in which the neo-capitalism is appearing. And therefore, we have had different trajectory of the innovation from these original people, naive. There was a kind of hero that wanted to do something very special, And afterward, they had a different direction. But some of them that are the one on which we will concentrate, so I don't want to talk about the ones that take some direction that we don't like, consolidate and they create some form of social enterprise. And therefore, you move from the more original startup, we will say now, using another language, social startup, in which everything is concentrated on the fact that they are new and doing something that has never been done before, towards something that has to last in time. So they consolidate in some way, in some kind of enterprise, very often based on an economy that is not only one economy, but it's a kind of ecology of different economy in which they mix the market, the state, the gift, the exchange, the different way in which the economical action can happen. And by this point of view, it's very interesting. But still, the image that we had was a kind of constellation, many little stars. That was very interesting. Each one of them also maybe with the capability to last in time and sometimes also to replicate, but mainly different points. It's only more recently that some of this area we can talk about a kind of social innovation at the second degree, where you have not only small points, but you start to see some common, you connect the point and you have an image, you have a figure that you can recognize. And we start to have in different sectors, and we can start to talk about, for instance, in the welfare, the community welfare. That is a way to consider the welfare, considering the fact that the people has not to be considered only as a client of a service, but as a person that participates in a community of care. But to give the example that I am also developing in the workshop, and not by chance because we are in Paris, one of these ideas that are more general, this second level social innovation, is the idea of I call it the city of proximity, or the 15-minute city of the ville de quart d'heure. So I don't want now to discuss the way in which the Paris mayor is doing it, but for sure, this idea of the 15-minute city, or the city of proximity, beyond how strong it is in Paris, it's spread. And this is an idea that is a social innovation at another level, because it's a narrative that includes the whole city, even though to do it you need all the molecular one. But it's a way to tell a story. And by this point of view, for me, it's very strong, because one thing is to tell the story of this constellation of something that are all different and it's difficult to find a common thread. And another story is to say, you know what, we want the ville de quart d'heure. And if you really do it, what you preach, is something that can give a kind of a framework to many different small things. And at the same time, I don't know in the case of Paris, but in other cases that I will mention in a while, if a major can use this kind of slogan, it means that something happened in the city. You cannot propose this slogan if you don't have some element on which you base what you are saying. So there is a kind of double link in between how many stars there are in our constellation and which kind of image you can create, and the two reinforce each other, because the more general vision give a frame to many different stars, so the different local activities, but at the same time the local activities give reality to this very general vision. And just not to talk about Paris that I don't know, I know sufficiently well, as has been said, that recently I worked for some years in Barcelona, and even though the Lady Major that Ada Colau do not use, because they don't use it in Barcelona, the term 15-minute city, they use the story about the superias or supermanzanas that are super blocks. It's a way to see the city in a different way. It's exactly the same. It's to reorganize the city in a way that you try to spread the services everywhere, so that everybody has, in principle, whatever they need at a relatively short distance from home, or from where they are. And at the same time, I like to call it proximity, and not only the 50 minutes, because the 50 minutes is only the functional dimension of this transformation of the city, where, as everybody knows, proximity means not only to be near in the space, but could be also to be near empathically with somebody else, to have a real relationship with somebody. And so to put together these two elements could be very important, and in my view is a very strong idea. But I don't want to talk about this more than what I'm doing now. If you want to come to our workshop, we are developing more this concept. But I want only to say the trajectory from very small group of people, very strange, toward something more organized, some kind of enterprise, toward the beginning of seeing overall pictures. And unfortunately, the world is going very badly. But in the complexity of the world, luckily, if we focus on this, we can clearly see a trajectory that is very interesting. And the question that you can have for the sake of my conversation is if we have the original creative community. Oh, it's very, you cannot put it a little bit higher, so it should not be so difficult. Is possible? Or no? Vabbè.
Not so easy.
Now, it's strange to have this. You have a table and you have this.
Because the projector is on
Vabbè.
the roof.
Okay. So you have to imagine what is in the bottom part of the slide. So this help. No, this is thought because it helps to promote the imagination. So you can imagine how interesting it will be if we have also the possibility to see what is in the bottom. In any case, my question to continue the line of my discussion is if we have those little creative group of people doing things in the way that I described before, and if we have a large image of how the city can change, but also how the welfare state can change, or how the idea of education can change, and so on and so forth, what they have in common. What they have in common, in my view, is the very radical, disruptive element that instead of having the neoliberal conception of the individual and society, where, as Lady Thatcher said 30 years ago, there is no society, there are only individuals, that idea moved, unfortunately, very fast in our society. So the mainstream is to go toward people that are more and more individualized. And the result is also more and more alone. The common denominator of all these stories is that you have to imagine a society where people, for some reason, like to discover again collaboration. And I say again because it's very near to the human being to be collaborative because we are social animals. But as Richard Sennett wrote some years ago, our society has been built to de-skill the capability of people to be collaborative. So they are built in a way that push people to be individualized. And therefore, if you see that somebody find the energy to break this mainstream and organize themselves, basing what they do on collaboration, this is a radical change. And this, in my view, is what qualifies the change that happened in these 2 decades, and that altogether we call social innovation. There should be transformative social innovation for sustainability. So the collaborative people already say break the dominant trend toward the individualistic and competitive behaviors. That is the main direction of the neoliberal society. And changing the role of the actors, at least at the local scale, they are not incremental, but they are radical. So this is a very important issue. We can go back, if you want, in the discussion. When we say we need a system change, there is an engineering way of looking to systems that think that to change the system, you have to take the overall system and change it as it was a kind of machine that you can drive where you want. But the complexity is not like this. The system, the big, large systemic change happens because you have several smaller, different scale or different kind of change into the body. And afterward, you will maybe have the main change. And this one are radical change, because if I decide to do something collaboratively, I break the rules that push you in an individual way. So to give the very simple way, if instead of using my personal car, I share the car with somebody else, it's not only improving the efficiency of a car, it's to change the idea of what is mobility and what is your media of transportation. And even more, if I choose to go by bike, that could be an individual choice, but you can be successful in going by bike in the city if something happens that includes also the other one. So this is to stress that the common denominator of what we should call this kind of social innovation is to find some radical change, at least at the personal level. So this radicality could be a group of people that choose to live nearby and to share something, breaking the idea of everybody in its own box, totally separated by the others. And this is a radical change. But in my view, I always say there is something that I can decide for myself. For instance, I decided to become vegetarian. I don't have to ask to anybody to do it, but it's a radical change. It's not I decide to eat only the meat that have a certain kind of characteristics. No, this is another story. So when we talk about social innovation, this kind of social innovation, we should find at the basis something that is a radical change. I will not develop too much, but this is also a kind of discussion that there is in between what is called social innovation and design for social innovation and social design. Because the social design, social means something for the good. And so you can do something for the good also without changing the system, simply helping, and sometimes you have to do it. I'm not blaming the social design, but the social design is not based on a systemic change, where the real social innovation, this kind of social innovation, transformative social innovation, it has to be based on maybe very local, but a systemic change. If you have this systemic change, you have a change in the system, and if you have a change in the system, very frequently you can solve problems that are normally otherwise intractable. So they really cannot be solved. And the example that normally is given is with the elderly. So if you consider the mainstream of the elderly should be considered as patient, somebody that brings problems, and somebody has to help them to solve the problem. Because there is the public, because there is the family, because there are the private. But in any case, the elderly is somebody on the shoulder of whom they have problems. And you can try to improve, you can develop robots, you can improve telemedicine, you can do all this kind of mechanized to follow that direction. Or you can use the Amartya Sen vision that says everybody has problems, but we have also capabilities, and you can work on the capabilities that they can have. Of course, they are very diverse. The capability of a very old person with some sickness and somebody that luckily is still healthy. But everybody has some capabilities, and you can build the solution coordinating the capability, creating conditions to give to this capability the possibility to express. When you do this, immediately, I will not say that things become easy, but the problem is not untractable as to solve the problem of the elderly with a normal idea of service when there are more elderly than young people. Because the elderly can become part of the solution, and you can organize some way of doing in which they are part of the solution. So it has to be done, but it's not impossible. It depends how you organize it, if it will work or not. And this has been very strong, so strong that for many years and until now, people look into what the social innovation is, concentrate on this last point. And therefore, there has been, if I can say, a kind of Anglo-Saxon attitude towards social innovation that has concentrated all the attention on this capability of social innovation to solve problems. And therefore, it has been said, social innovation is a way to solve problems. You will say, and so what? Where is the problem? maybe I will try to explain it in a while, but for a moment keep like this. If we were talking about a chair, for the designer here, it's clear, is as we will say, the chair is only the function of sitting. But we all know that the chair is not only the function of sitting, because what you design as a side that is a solution, find solution, and also a sign that has been also said is sense-making. And as a matter of fact, concentrated to, you don't see it because it's here, but you should imagine that here the discrete, they solve otherwise intractable problems. So here there is a hidden part of my presentation. So this is only for the very tall ones that can see what is written down there. And, but it has been forgotten that if they break the individualistic attitude, they also generate new culture, and in some way they generate new idea of quality. And I find that to concentrate what the new qualities that these stories are telling us is very important for everybody, and particularly for who is designer of architects. And so the collaborative people are also generating new qualities. And the qualities of what? For instance, the quality of time. And it's clear for whoever has had some relationships with this kind of social innovation that help people in some way, not necessarily to slow down everything, but to conceive at least that there are different moments in life with different times. So instead of talking of one time, we can talk about an ecology of times, where in our life we can have some moment in which we like to be fast, but there the same right to have moment in which we like to be slow. We rediscover the idea of place, because all the discussion about the digitalization, the living in the digital space, etc., has in some way considered the physical space as not so important. The majority of the social innovation are really rooted in a place, so bring people again to consider and to, very importantly, take care of what they have around. And therefore there is a rediscussion about the importance of having physical body that are positioned in some way in the space, and how these physical relationships happen. And the more of this activity asks to people to do something. So in a moment in which we have so many question marks about work and the future of work, they are telling us about the fact that we express ourselves also through what we do. And what we do could be done with care, could be done with attention. And therefore it's very important moment to start to rediscuss or to bring some contribution in the ongoing discussion about the future of work. And finally, but probably is the most important, if you reconsider time and you reconsider work intended as action on the physical world around us and place, at the end we arrive to care. That, as probably you know, is one of the key issues that is largely discussed when now we talk about, as has been mentioned, the more than human relationships, when we talk about what should be the essence of the relationship in between human being and between human being and the planet. For an ecological society, the key issue is care. And therefore, to recognize the quality and the importance of care is very important, because probably you know, sometimes people say that our society, our city, are the careless cities, are the city of the society in which everything is transformed and marketized in a service in which you have a client and a service deliverer. And this is the opposite of any idea of care. So all those initiatives repropose very strongly and practically the idea of care. And this is very important. Altogether, if you take space, time, work, care, you have not some little thing in our structure, in our cultural structure. There is really the beginning of a new civilization. because the new civilization, as it happened when we had change in the civilization, has been a change in the radical component of our culture. And by the way, it's a new way of thinking about well-being. And the new way of thinking about well-being is the only way to propose a sustainable society that have different expectations in relation to what is the well-being. So if we don't change the basis of the expectation of people, you cannot say to somebody that is poor that you want to have a big car as yours, or the air conditioning as yours. And therefore, you cannot ethically make this thing. If not, you are starting to show that there are different ways of living where the hierarchy of what is better to do is different. And this is very important. For me, it's fundamental. Now going to the ecology of relationships, we are totally in focus with that, because now this is a little bit a change of level of the discussion, a little bit more theoretical, but this, the common issue is a different idea of relationships. The relationships that brings you to care, they bring you to care for the other people, they brings you to have to take the time that is needed to do some work well done, etc., etc. And here we arrive to a crucial point, or some crucial point. So this is what we have seen in the first 15 years or 12 years of observation of social innovation. So what we have learned now is summarizing what I said before, that social innovation can be seen as a way to find solutions. That is okay, but the risk, I don't know if you are familiar with the term solutionist. The term solutionist means to imagine that our society is facing a lot of problems, but the problems can be separated in specific problems, and you can solve one problem by one, and this is a solution approach to the reality. And I think that it's not that you should not find a specific problem and try to find solution for each problems, but my impression and the impression of many people is that they overcome the crisis in which we are, do not ask only to solve a lot of individual problems, that will be the solutionist attitude, but also to change the meaning of things. Therefore, if design for social innovation is only seen as a designer as who designs as a problem solver, nothing against, but against an ideology that try to say that this is the only things to be done, where, as I said before, social innovation indicate us also emerging qualities. And I think that everybody, and in particular we should have more attention to the sense-making of this social innovation. And so in which way, with our design, we can help this kind of redefinition of the meaning, maybe elaborating, for instance, the new idea of qualities that I was proposing before, and arriving to a new idea of well-being that is based on relationships. But we have a problem, ladies and gentlemen. That relationship cannot be designed. And so it seems that we are in a no-end, in a direction that has no solution. Because if we say, as has been said also before, oh, we discovered that everything is relationship and the real quality of our life is mostly related to the quality of the relationships, fantastic. And so what we design? Because relationship, luckily, cannot be designed. They cannot be designed the fact that I'm friend with her, I fall in love with him, could happen, or I hate somebody else. This happens in the relation of so many different factors. But what we have learned is that you cannot design directly the relationships, but you can create conditions in which it's more possible and probable that a certain kind of relation can happen. So nobody is sure that if you do this and that, it will happen, but you can create this kind of condition, and in some way feed the social conversation with some ideas that maybe generate or could potentially generate. The example that I did also this morning in the workshop, so sorry for who already heard it, I go back to this image that I like it a lot. And if you see this image, what you see people dancing. And the people dancing are also in some way interacting. So each one of this couple have an interaction. But of course, nobody can decide what they will say, if they will have a good relationship, if maybe they become friends, maybe whatever can happen afterwards. So each of these couple is in some way developing a kind of relationship with their own way of doing. But nevertheless, to make this happen, that you cannot design the relationship, but you can design, first of all, the idea that you can dance. And in this case, the idea that you can dance in that way. And those people, even they don't know each other, they know how to dance. And they know that there is something that can be done together that is called dancing. And therefore, if I move from my place and go to this lady and ask, won't you dance with me? Even if I don't know you, we know how to dance. So we have an idea of dancing in this way, a shared idea of dancing, and we have a knowledge that we share. We both are capable to dance, and so we can do it together. And this is a very important part to have. And the other part is you should have a space in which this can happen. In this case, it's a public space that has been occupied by this dancer, or could be a dancing hall, could be, but in any case, you can generate a space in which it's possible to do it. So when we say you cannot design the relationships, but you can design the conditions, in general terms, you have these two main elements, something that makes things possible, and something that generates the willing and the individual capability to start conversation, if you want. And when you consider these two, you have the possibility to design a lot of things. So design for social innovation, when it's considered as a design for new kind of relationships, you cannot directly design social innovation in the same way that you cannot directly design relationship. But, I repeat, you can create the condition. And when we said which kind of design you need, I say, given that it's everything that you can do, it's totally far away to being a discipline. There is no one design discipline that is the one that say, we are the one that design for relationship, or we are the one that design for social innovation. That could be the same, because you don't see it. You see only one, but I can read. You can use strategic design to reframe the system. In that case, they reframed the system because they transformed a street in a dancing hall. So this is a change in the system. You can use communication design because you have to promote certain idea and to develop, to consolidate, and to spread them. You can use communication design. You can use service design because you can promote some conditions that permit to have this relationship in the better way, to improve the quality of the potential relationship. And you have a space and products because this happens in physical places. And sometimes you have some object, we discussed it this morning, that could be relational object. So some objects that have the capability to start conversation in between people. So even who design space and who design object can play a role. You can have a design more related to management, to manage something that is already relatively established, but you can also have design activism in which you make some kind of also provocation sometime to start. I could continue in this list just to say it's not a discipline. Everyone can bring some contribution, and if we want to have different disciplines, and I'm not contrary in principle to have different disciplines, every discipline can bring some contribution to this story. All this was before the pandemic. So these are considerations that I summarized, but it took more than 10 years to put this idea together. So even they could appear now, I don't know how they appear, but it took a lot of time to understand. And afterward, we had the pandemic. So the pandemic can be seen as a kind of huge worldwide social experiment in which from one day to the other, hundreds of millions of people in the world had to change their way of living. And as you know, this will have consequences. Some of them we are capable to recognize, some of them we are not capable to recognize yet. But I want to extract only something that is more useful for the sake of this discussion. And what I wanted to say is, for sure it's clear that, let's say, we already was living in a hybrid space, partially in the physical and partially in the digital. But for sure, I think, also in France, I'm sure, the average of the baricentro of our life in between the physical and the digital has been pushed toward the digital. And many people, including myself, think that it will not remain as it is now forever, but it will not come back to before. So in some way, all our life has been pushed toward the digital. And in this moving toward the digital, there are different directions, because one direction is the scenario of, I call it, everything at home and from home, that you can easily imagine what it is. That is a dystopic scenario in which you don't have society, so this is the maximum of individualization, each one at home doing everything and having some kind of digital community with all the implications that this brings. But we have also seen that some group started to organize at the locality scale using the technology. So the same basic technology that the mainstream is to spread and to separate the people can also be used to recompose people, a kind of meetup, a kind of generalized meetup. So to take people that are spread on the territory but not so far away, that do not know each other, and to create a platform that permits them to find a common goal, to find a way to organize something together, etc. So this is very important, and also give us the light of how things can happen. Because the second element is that we discover the value of socializing with your neighborhood, with the one that is living in your same building. Because in a world that was thinking themselves only in the digital space, you was looking to the one that was more similar to you because they like more your same music, they play the same game, they have the same kind of interest wherever they are. So considering that the one that is near to you physically maybe is not so interesting because they are not looking for the same music, they're not playing the same game, etc. But when you really need somebody, you discover that who is near with you have something extremely important in common with you, and have in common the fact that we are sharing, our bodies are sharing the same space in a system of proximity, and the care, whatever kind of care, cannot be expressed in distance. You can take care only with somebody that is nearby to you. Somebody wrote, the care is mainly a tactile. So you need touch. You need to be near, to touch each other, to have care. You don't have care if you don't have this kind of tactile dimension. And so this has been a discovery for many people that maybe somebody was already thinking this, but it was not so diffuse as it is today. And also the importance of having shops and services around is considered as more important. But all this has to be seen on the light of the digitalization of our life. So when we talk about neighborhoods and we talk about the one that is living in the near doors to you, it's not going back to the village of the past. It is to create a new kind of proximity that will be also based on using the digital space to support this kind of proximity. And I wrote a book that is called Livable Proximity, but it's not my invention. It's one of those words that became in the last months a kind of keyword. So it existed since centuries, of course, but it became very, very much discussed. So in some way we can say the pandemic, in between many other stories that I'm not mentioning now, but it has supported some idea that was already being proposed. So at least we can say there is not a clash between some ideas and some possibilities that have been shown by the pandemic, and we can work on it. But again, there is a final but. So I promise in 5 minutes I finish. All this story is related to, as I was saying at the beginning, what started at the beginning of the century, it started mainly in a certain area of the population, it spread in other places. Somebody also moved to, for sure, it moved also in totally different places. For instance, I'm still working telematically with China, and there is nothing that I mentioned today that you cannot find in China. So you find everything that I mentioned today, included the 15-minute city in the program of Shanghai. I don't know what they will do, but they are telling about the 15-minute city. So it started in Europe, America. It started between people more or less as we are in this room, but it spread geographically and also a little bit in other layer of the society. But for sure, also the image that I show, that has not been done specifically for this presentation, or the images that I've used in this period, represent more or less the same kind of people. I am one of those that do not criticize that, because I think that also the middle class is a huge part of the population, first. Secondly, that some idea can emerge in some place and afterward maybe they can spread. But for sure we can ask ourselves, if we move the scenery from the one that I proposed until now to something like this, we can ask if we can have social innovation that move from the groups of people that are unfortunately increasing, that are the more poor, the poorest, the most marginalized, the more excluded. And this is the big question that we should have. And the second question, and I like a lot this image because you see that everything is burning around, and the lady is looking to the husband as saying, well, now what we do? But without a lot of excitement, considering the house is burning. And I think that this is a condition of us. So we are discussing about the fact that the planet is burning, but there is no perception of the urgency of what should happen if we really consider this is really burning. And if you want to talk about myself, at a certain age, I started to talk about sustainability when the idea started. And the rhetoric was, if we don't do something today, we will have a lot of problem in the future. Now we have to say, if we don't do something today, we will have more problem in the future, but we have a lot of problem already today. In some way, we are already, it's sad to be said, but inside the catastrophe. We have not to wait. And therefore, I'm sure that something different has to happen to permit us to think what to do when we really consider deeply that is not only to prepare ourselves for a better future, but it's also to prepare ourselves for being inside the catastrophe. And by this point of view, it could be interesting for you to know that the DESIS network, the next conversation will be social innovation in post-catastrophic phase. Because now the post-catastrophic is not a movie. It's not something that can happen, maybe it will happen, or it happen in places that we talking are not considering so much. But we have catastrophe in which some very important things happen in every country, included in Europe. Included the fact that at a certain point you don't have electricity, so I want to see what we can do with all our devices if we don't have electricity. So we have really to change our mind and to think that we should be prepared not only to do something for the future, but also to create a more resilient system for today, facing something that I will not say unforeseeable, but is foreseeable what can happen. So I think the design questions have to include all that I said before, because I repeat, at least for me, but I could be criticized. I think that those qualities, those visions of reframing has been very powerful and started to change the mentality of our cultures. But at the same time, and design, as I tried to explain very quickly, has a lot to do. But now we have new questions, and the new question is exactly the one that I said. So if this is when we say the city of the future, the majority of the people in the future will be in city, but the city will be like this, not as Paris or Milano. So we have to ask ourselves what social innovation could do to reduce inequality beyond the fact that we have something like this also in Milano today, unfortunately, and probably also in Paris. And the other one, as I said, is what we can do, how we can see some social innovation related to being in an ecological crisis, not to say in an ecological catastrophe. And I think that we should go back to what was at the beginning of the last century. So at the beginning of the last century, it was very difficult to see the social innovation because it was the beginning. So we had to build very special spectacles to recognize who was doing something new when we call it creative communities. So now probably we have to continue the line of what has been done in the previous wave of social innovation, but we have to be capable to look very attentively in the society where new signals are appearing that are related to how social innovation can help in reducing inequalities, how social innovation can help in creating a resilient society facing possible and probable catastrophe. And finally, the third question is how we can face possible catastrophe at the same time empowering the poorest. So not we, how they can empower themselves and we can help them. And I think that these are huge questions that are not covering everything that design can do, but should cover a lot of the interrogative question that we can have in a lot of our practical research or action research that we can develop. And this is what I refer in a very general sense as the second wave of social innovation that should keep in account all these things. And sometimes I say we, but I am a little bit ambiguous because sometimes I say we talking about human being and sometimes I say we talking about designers. So the first we is we as human beings have to promote, to help to promote social innovation in a second wave of social innovation. And we as designers have to generate some capability of screening into reality and recognize the signal of the future that are emerging and try to rebuild some common figure of what is appearing. Thank you. Sorry, I was always looking to, I don't know why, because they are in light and you are in the dark. It's not that I prefer them. It's only that for some reason they were very well lighted where you are in the darkness there, so it was more difficult to look in this direction. But I promise now, if you have some question, I will privilege the question that come from this sector of the audience. If there are some questions. Yes. You see.
But I'm sorry, so I can go there if you prefer.
Yeah.
No, you mentioned that is not a reproduction of village from the past. Because when you described the city of 15 minutes and our relationship, and we thought that is okay. The village are functioning like that. Yeah. So. Could you maybe go deeper in your...
Yes. Well, we had a very interesting discussion this morning because in the workshop we had a guest that is Patrick Bernard, from an organization that is called Hyper Voisins. And they told a very interesting story, and I don't now go back to everything he told, but he frequently used the term village. And so we had the opportunity to have this kind of exchange because, at least in the Italian atmosphere, there is somebody that tells the city of proximity. In Italiano, we say la città dei borghi, that means the city of the villages. And I think that this is not a good word to use for several reasons. First, because it makes people think that we want to go back. But first of all, we cannot. Even if we would like to go back, we cannot, because everything changed in the meantime. So it's impossible to go back. So you are promising something that will not happen. Secondly, because somebody maybe could be nostalgic of the past, and somebody think, okay, the past have some good things, but also many others that was not so good. And I am one of those. So I don't think that the past was a paradise. And therefore, why I had to take the past as the model. This do not mean that you can use some element of the past. The analogy that I do is that when you have the shift from the Roman Empire to the so-called medieval period, the people that was building the cathedral, or the medieval cathedral, used the material for the temple of the Roman. So you use the same column, the same different elements, but the very general meaning is totally diverse. So every civilization uses what has been produced by the previous one, and there is no reason for us not to use something that has been not only produced for the previous one, that is a capitalistic neoliberal solution, but to move also to try to take something from the previous one. But the meaning has to be totally diverse. So even though you can use some element, if you say this is the village, in my view, you give to the people a wrong position. And I can say something much more political. Yes. This story of the local and the villages, etc., is now taken by the ultra-right. And this is something that put people like me, and probably many of you, in a very difficult condition, because until a certain moment, and also to be simple in my presentation, say you have the Thatcher-like people, the society of individual in competition in the world, so the traditional neoliberal position, and the good are all those that talk about going together and generate communities. And this was difficult, but relatively simple, because it was not so difficult to see who were the good and who were the bad guys. But now you have that the ultra-right everywhere is starting to use terms as locality, local production, and community, etc., etc. And therefore, our path is very difficult and slippery, because we will not have a non-society of individuals, but me, at least, I speak for myself, will not have the kind of community that are proposed by the ultra-right. That is community, because why they mention community? Because they want to give borders. This is the only reason why they talk about community, because they think, in the old sense, the community is something with borders. So you are of my community, or you are not of my community. Where we had a discussion this morning, the community that this kind of social innovation is bringing is a mesh of project-based community. So you have a group of people that have some project, and afterward, working in the same place, they mix each other, and seen from a certain distance, you say, this is a community or this locality. But if you look inside, you cannot find the border, because you have different people working on different projects, and the project can have people that participate from many different places. So the good thing of this social innovation is to propose an idea of community, and we have to use the term community because it's needed, but a community that is open. That could be a little bit paradoxical, because the community are also identitarian, But the community, this is not my invention, it's the observation of what happens, are open communities that are mesh or product-based community. And therefore you are not creating the border to distinguish the we against the others. So if you say the village by definition has borders. So it's politically slippery. I understand that people, you have the impression, not you, but who use it, have the impression that this is simpler to be understood. But in my view as a designer, we must use metaphors. But the metaphors are very strong and very dangerous. Because a metaphor means you use some mental concept that people have in mind, and you say, you know what we want to do, what you have in mind. But if people have in mind the community of the past, you are telling a story that first of all is wrong, and second, politically can be used in a totally different way than the one that we would like to see for the future. It was an answer enough?
Exactly the answer. I was waiting to hear you.
Yes, oh, finally we have also this side of the...
Can I ask my question in French? Is that okay?
Can you... So I am a little bit deaf, so...
Can I ask my question in French, or do you prefer in English?
Oh, as you want. If you speak French slowly, I can understand. But as you...
Well, you tell me if you don't understand and
Yeah.
formulate it in
Yeah.
English. So I was j'étais assez intéressé par le fait que vous ayez dit que traditionnellement l'innovation sociale s'adressait à des personnes plutôt privilégiées. Et j'ai été assez surpris en fait parce que de ce que j'avais lu sur l'innovation sociale, c'était plutôt vers les personnes qui avaient, qui n'étaient pas non plus favorisées. Et du coup, je me demandais dans quelle mesure c'était quelque chose d'empiriquement vérifié, ou est-ce que c'était simplement que les théoriciens et théoriciennes de l'innovation sociale s'étaient penchés sur des formes d'innovation qui leur parlaient, et qu'ils n'ont pas considéré d'autres formes d'innovation dans d'autres pays, dans d'autres cultures, ou est-ce que c'est vraiment traditionnellement quelque chose, comme vous l'avez dit, qui s'adresse plutôt à des personnes privilégiées?
Yeah. First of all, as it's obvious, I can make mistake. So maybe my interpretation is not correct. So I tell you my impression. And this is not only my impression. There is also somebody that is critical toward the social innovation because they say what I also anticipate. This is only an issue for white middle class. And if you look to the literature, to look at what people explain, if you look the way in which evolved, moving from original creative community toward the social enterprises, etc., is something that comes from people that are not very rich, but they are not so rich, so they want to improve the quality of the life, increasing the possibility. So one of the stuff, for instance, when you do a co-housing or collaborative housing, you say, look, this is fantastic because you can have a smaller apartment, but if you share a big living room, you can make a party that in your home you cannot do. If you share a big kitchen, a community kitchen, you can have, again, cooking with many people in your little kitchen, you cannot do it. If you share a place for kids, a playground for kids, you can have the privilege of having a playground for kids. If you share a guest room, you can have a room when you need it. Of course, you have to take to coordinate with the other. But so you say, look, with the same kind of economical effort, you can have a much richer condition because you could have something that otherwise you will not have. This is not the rhetoric that I'm inventing. It's a rhetoric that has been used to promote the collaborative living. Well, this is a way to tell the story, if you want. But this story do not work in a favela or do not work in the same way in the favela. And therefore, the idea of collaboration that I put as, maybe a mistake, but I put at the center of this wave of collaboration, and this is for sure valuable where I know, Europe, America, North America, and China, that I know sufficiently well. The collaboration is done by people that have been already individualized and choose to do something together. Where in other places you have a higher level of communities that happen in a traditional way that is not the same thing. So if we see something that is a community in many places, it's more the remaining, I would say, of traditional community, the beginning of a new community. Afterward, I can mention some example in which you can see in some place in South America, in Africa, in Thailand, where I'm working now, some examples that are very interesting. And therefore, for me, that is already the second wave of social innovation. So a wave in which some ideas that come from the first wave could be elaborated, transformed, and redefined by these people. But it has to be redefined by other people. And frankly speaking, I can talk about a community garden in Milano or in New York or in other places or in China. I cannot say what is a community garden in a favela or in another place, or in Thailand, where I give some advice, but I will not tell my story about my relationship with this project, but they are telling me stories that are interesting, and I like to participate to, because I see how the idea move. But I don't know if I answered to your question. So we should have, what happened 20 years ago, that many people in the world started to look some example, give some name, make them more visible. One of the first projects that we had in DESIS was called amplifying. There was a look into something that was happening in a place, giving more visibility, so amplifying the signal of something that was weak. I think that now should happen something similar in relation to social innovation that start in totally different context, and in relation to the problematic of being in a catastrophic phase. And we should, and we start to do it. We try to do it with all the limit. And but for me, it's not what has been discussed until now, at least in my experience. Not in the mainstream, what I call the Anglo-Saxon social interpretation of social innovation, the solutionist that transform everything in social enterprises, nor in the beginning of the discussion of the quality that is still related to the change from being an individual toward being somebody that recognizes some quality of care, etc. If you are in a totally different condition, probably there are some living part of the traditional culture that if nothing happens, maybe they are decreasing, and maybe something can happen to use this traditional living material to make something new happen. But probably it's not me that will tell this story, not because I'm very old and will not have the time to do it, but also because I think that other leaders, other people has to start to be interpret of what is happening. Somebody else?
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
In terms of the kind of political critique of the notion of care, can you hear me okay? In terms of, to what point when you're doing that kind of work in the community, do you have an articulation of the fine line between innovation and then the community actually taking over the responsibility that is something that the state should be responding to?
The state, you mean?
Well, there's lots of what we see with COVID,
yeah.
see with other pandemics.
Yeah. Let's say now we are again in the first wave. And I repeat, we have to see the limit, but I think that is an incredibly rich material that should still be discussed and understood, because now we have not only the startup, but we have also stories that last since years. And looking to that, I see that on the medium term, no one of them, the successful one, successful not in economical term, but that succeed in surviving and living sufficiently well, not losing the majority of the original ideas, have some form of relationship with institutions. At the point that I say that if at the beginning you can have somebody that starts something without any relationship with institutions, after a while, and the while is when the heroes are tired. the one that start things are called the social heroes. The social hero can do something against everything, but they cannot last forever. So to permit to the good idea to consolidate and to last in time, they have to be, it's a bad word, but it's institutionalized in part. And so we have to reframe the meaning of institutions, considering as what permit to the very human process that people can start with enthusiasm, and afterward the enthusiasm decrease. But they have generated something. If you don't do anything, when they are tired, everything stops. And the institutions, the good sense of institution is to find a way to create conditions in which, if the hero is tired, the majority of what they did remain. And this is a lot to do with design, because what design do at the end? You have an idea, and afterward you make a prototype, and afterward you try to make this prototype the traditional product design in a way that could spread, because you reduce the price, you reduce the consumption, you make it easier to be used, etc. And this is the same. You can have, let's take the famous example of the community garden. When it started, the community garden was in New York, or at least one of the starting points of the community garden was in New York. The people was called guerrilla gardening. They are guerrilla because they had to do it against everything. And they have had friction with police and with everybody, because the institution do not recognize what they was doing. And this was the beginning. But afterward, and they was really willing to do, and to be a community gardener, you had to accept to be exposed to this kind of fight against the police, against the other part of society. If you jump, maybe now 40 years, you see that every city say, you are a group of people that want to do something and maintain your garden, so I don't have to pay for the gardening. Well done, I help you, I give you what you need. And therefore, something happened. Now I make a little bit of joke, but it's not only because I can spend less, but because many institutions recognized the good idea. So what happened in between the beginning, when to make a community garden you have to fight against the police, that means fight against the norms, and a moment in which this opportunity are recognized, and many cities offer possibility to do it, not only accept that you do it, but also maybe they help you in doing it. Well, this is the institutionalization. But it's a very complicated institutionalization. It's a kind of collaborative governance, because what I remain of the community garden, but could be valuable for whatever. It's a very delicate way of working, because if the institution do not do enough, the fatigue, the be tired, could bring all the story to decrease, and when the hero are tired, everything disappears. But also, if the institution are too present, they want to do too much. They can kill the energy, because the people that goes every day, or at least a few hours in the week, to work in this garden, if they have the impression that in the reality they are gardener working for the mayor without being paid, they will not do it. So the key issue is a governance that helps people maintaining the sense of ownership of what they do. So the community gardener, also in the condition in which the community welcome your work, have to be put in the position to feel that that is your, not your personal garden, but the garden that you take care of for you, the community, and the city. But you are the principal actor of this story, and the community kindly help you. And to find this equilibrium in between being helpful but not killing, as this kind of Italian mother with the kids. There are too much mother, so they kill, not kill really, but in some way kill some aspect of the way of being of the kids. It could be dangerous in the fact that people do not do it. They ask, well, if you want that I do it, you have to pay me. And there are some examples that show how this can be done. And now I don't want to be too long, so I don't know if I tell you this example. but I tell only one that I like it a lot. That started, at least the one that I know, started in Bologna in Italy and after spread in Italy. That is, whenever you want to do something, you have to ask permissions. You have to say it's possible. You have to talk with different division of the MRE. And so there is a lot of bureaucracy that you have to face. And this, you have to be really a hero to start a community garden. Or this morning, the people of the Hyper Voisin was talking about eating together the longest table in Paris or in the planet. There was 3,000 people at the same. But to do it, you have to ask for a lot of permission. The people cannot understand, and so it can become very difficult, and you have to spend a lot of energy to do it. So somebody started to think that there was so many emerging energy that was killed by the fact that they do not arrive to the point to make the right question to the right people, because it was too complicated. So they defined something very simple that is called il patto coi cittadini, the pact with the citizens, in which some people expert in administration, in lawyers, etc., create a frame, very simple frame, that once that you know that this frame exists, it's very easy to say, well, we, il Comune di Bologna, says if you want to do something, it's enough that this something is coherent with this frame. If it is coherent with this frame, you can do it and we will help you in a certain way. And this is so fantastic that now it's used in many different places, included, I live in a little village where the mairie has very few possibility to manage to do things. So in tendency they were saying no, 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 because it was simpler. Now that they adopted this, there are a lot of activity that you can do in this frame. So this is an example for me of a way to create an institution that is not putting a hat, but is creating a ground. If you want to finish, there is, sorry for the one that was this morning, and I repeat also this one. Normally we say there is top-down and bottom-up. And we was now talking about the bottom-up and what is the relation with the top-down. But if we had a really good governance, collaborative governance, we should have the bottom and what is behind the bottom. Because the institution should be the one that help in creating a ground on which you can have many different plants that flourish. So the metaphor should be the metaphor of the gardeners that prepare the ground in the way that many different plants can coexist and flourish. And therefore, the role is not so much what you do from the top, but what you do from behind or from below, that you create conditions in which the energy that are potentially spread in the society can flourish. And this is gardening.
Maybe a last question. We're running out of time. Maybe we can go on exchanging in front of the buffet, because there's a buffet waiting for us. And, so if any more questions, we could go. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you to you. The poor student of the workshop should be very tired of listening me to talk for so many hours during the day. You will have nightmare during the night.